Hi everyone, let's talk about masterworking in Diablo 4. As you probably know, this was introduced in Season 4 as a way to late game progress our characters and, replace the old blacksmith upgrades that we had with a much more interesting system. And it allows us to kind of customize the stats on our gear a little bit. So the overall idea behind it, I think, is actually pretty good. But I think it has also become obvious in the last seasons that it's just kind of a huge grind. And it does have its downsides, which I'm really talking about. Well, I had some of my Maxwell fellows put together this year. So this was made by Beat Dropper, who's one of our barb writers. He's like a big math guy. He decided to make some simulations about the cost of masterworking that I want to talk about with you. And then Icy Troll put this together, another one of our Maxwell guys, and made a nice little graph out of this. So we have a graph here that talks about what is the cost of masterworking an item with 3 out of 3 right affix crits. And this is done for either legendaries and for uniques, which have 5 or 4 affixes, so the cost is different. And then you also have the same if you want only 2 out of 3 masterwork crits. And well, those results might surprise you because it is actually extremely costly, as you might imagine. But it's even crazier than I guess most people might have thought. So here's an overview of this, for example. So you can see this. The left side basically are uniques. So 2 out of 3 affixes and 3 out of 3 affixes. And then on the right side we have legendaries, 2 out of 3 and 3 out of 3. So what this means is 2 out of 3 are the yellow numbers on your gear and 3 out of 3 are the orange numbers. So yellow, for example, like this one here, this would be in this category here, the third column. So yeah, overall you can see the mats requirement is extremely high. And not just for the Opticide, interestingly, Opticide being like the masterworking material, basically, right? You go farm Tribute of Refinement, which is the best way to get it. And you get like 2k per run on Torment 4, so people have a lot of them. You can share them in rotas and so on. You can get Opticide pretty fast. We're talking about like 30, 40,000 per hour fast, maybe more even. So that is actually kind of like the easiest thing to get in this entire system, funny enough. Because most people actually run out on other materials. If you're playing, for example, SSF or Hardcore, where there's basically no economy, then gold, in fact, will be a bottleneck. Like as a Hardcore player, you just don't have gold. All this gold basically comes from vendoring uniques. So I do my own boss runs, and then I individually mark every single non-ancestral unique, and then I vendor it. And then I salvage only the ancestors because they give more materials and repeat. So this is the main strategy to get gold in Hardcore, for example. Or if you're not engaging with the extremely inflated RMT duping economy in Softcore, you'll just not really have gold these days. Whispers are kind of a joke, Hordes are kind of a joke, and the only thing you can do is what I just explained. So gold is actually the #1 bottleneck. But overall, I gotta say, at least from like a mostly SF perspective, if you look at my materials here, I have kind of like very little of everything, to be honest, because I just don't do as many boss runs as other people. I don't get that much gold, I don't get that much material. But overall, I've played like a dozen different builds by now, and I have been able to masterwork my stuff a little bit at least. Gold is a problem, but for people that trade, I guess not. But on the other hand, funny enough, as I said, Opticide is actually very easy. If you do refinement tributes, and even if you don't, even if you just farm hordes, even if you first farm Nightmare Dungeons, you can get Opticide at probably at least roughly half the speed, I'd say. So we're still talking about like 24,000 per hour or so if you just farm Nightmare Dungeons really fast. Which means that for uniques, that's actually enough for a 3 out of 3 hit on average. And even for legendaries, you're not that far off. Like 1.5 hours of just farming Nightmare Dungeons, for example, would actually give you the perfect outcome of what you want. So interestingly, Opticide is very easy here. But then look at the other stuff, basic materials. So this includes iron chunks or rawhide. So either depending on the weapon or armor slot or jewelry slot, you need one or the other. And that is a lot. For example, for a 3 out of 3 hit on a unique, we're talking about 22k. On a legendary, we're talking about 42k iron chunks, for example. Yeah, I mean, I do have a bunch here, but the main source of these is actually just farming bosses. And there's not really any other good source of like target farming this or so. So if my current materials right now, I could do, yeah, like 1.5 hits or so on a weapon. And then, yeah, maybe like 3 on like an armor slot or something. And that's it, then I'm out. And for some other materials, it actually looks even more dire. So we have the Veil Crystals, for example. There seems to be like a huge shortage in Season 8 as well. I hear that all the time, at least from the trader, blasters. There's run out of Veil Crystals and Forgotten Souls, interestingly, and there's not really a clear target farm for those. So in the past, the basic materials have been buffed. That was like a thing, I think, back in Season 6. Everyone was like moaning about those. The drop rates are really low and there were some buffs. But I think nothing has happened to Veil Crystals and Forgotten Souls. And you see here, for example, for a legendary, you need 3,000 Forgotten Souls. And for example, when you farm bosses, I think it's something like 8 per boss kill or something like that on Torment 4. So it's going up very slow. I could do 1.5 items currently with my Forgotten Soul count. And for the Veil Crystals, it looks kind of similar as well, right? Actually even worse. I can actually not do a single item, not even a unique, with a 3 out of 3 hit right now with my Veil Crystal count. And Veil Crystals really doesn't have any target farm at all. It's basically just like random salvage stuff, and you also, I think, might get some from, you know, some random sources, like bosses might spit out a few. But overall, Veil Crystals just doesn't really have like a great source right now. Now, I want to talk about why this is a problem. So the problem I have with masterworking is that not only is it like extremely costly to get the stuff that you want, but in order to do so, you have to fully reset the item every single time. And the thing is that we actually have a lot of builds that have a lot of items that have very specific stats they care about, or have a lot of stats they don't care about at all. So an example is this build right now. I have a Air of Perdition equipped, and the only stat that matters for me in any way on this item is the lucky hit chance. And I have no hits on lucky hit chance, which is mostly a result of me using this item for a previous character, because there I did care about core skills, for example. But my build currently does not care about it. I don't need the crit, it doesn't do anything. Neither does the movement speed because I'm capped, and my core skill doesn't do any damage. So the only thing I want here is lucky hit chance. And now in order to do something with this, I have to fully reset that thing, go there back to 0, and then start over again and do the whole process again. And now the other problem is, when I get an upgrade of this item, after I have invested this into my item, I never really want to touch that new item again, right? You sometimes find like a 2GA upgrade of an item, let's say my crossbow here. Like if I actually find a 2GA crossbow and I get lucky, and I get like dex and life on it, I never want to masterwork it, because I have already masterworked this item to perfection. It has exactly the 2 things that I need. I got very lucky here, I didn't do like 100 resets. But I needed the yellow Twisting Blades roll, and I needed the Cutthroat attack speed. And without that, I could not use this item, basically. And now if I get an upgrade, I have to do exactly the same again, which is this, right? We're talking about actually the right side here, the last column. And well, that is ridiculous, I think. And not only that, even in a scenario where I don't get any upgrades and I just want to maybe try to improve my masterworking outcome, let's say I take my Shroud here, right? It's very unlikely I will ever get a better one. I have a GA on a life, which is the best stuff to get. And then I would think, okay, maybe I'm going to try to hit a double life, or maybe I'm going to try to hit a triple life. I would have to remove my, what is kind of like one of the second best outcomes, let's say. All stars is fine. But let's say I want to try to improve it. I have to remove everything I got and then have a very high risk of not even getting back to where I was. That's the main problem as well, right? You have to go back to Masterwork 0, and if I don't have a huge pile of materials and gold in order to Masterwork this thing 100 times in a row, then I have a high chance of just being weaker than I was before. That's also really a struggle, I think, and something that should be addressed in my book. Like the fact that you can make a character weaker and then just not really get back to where you were, and it really makes it so that people just stockpile, you know, dozens of thousands of all the materials and a lot of gold, and they never really want to touch the masterworking system regularly, because, well, you just might make a character weaker, or you might even break your character in some ways, right? If you're talking about, let's say, you have like a cooldown roll on your Shaco. Cooldown roll on the Shaco is like one of the most like impactful rolls you can possibly have, because it has this insane value. It starts at 20% base with GA 30%, and then goes all the way up to 54% on a single piece. And a reduction effect scales exponentially. The more you have on the same item, the better each percent becomes. So going from a 39% cooldown Shaco to a 44 with a third crit is a huge upgrade. And getting the GA on top of it is an insane upgrade. Like just that is like worth the same as roughly 2 or 3 cooldown rolls on the rest of the gear. So you have to have like a fully maxed out like cooldown roll on your neck, and a fully maxed out cooldown roll on Rakanov boots, for example, and maybe like an offhand if you're playing a caster. All those 3 together would be kind of comparable to what the GA does on the Shaco, like that. So this is kind of how that works. So in some cases you have this insanely high value of certain affixes and you really want to hit them. Some builds just, hyper scale that. Let's say Lightning Spear Sork, one of the most popular and strongest builds in the game right now, it is like an absolute end game machine if you have a Shaco with GA cooldown and for triple masterwork. But if you just lose out on one of the masterworks even, it's such a noticeable difference in power. And I think that this system really leads to a lot of frustration with players. Personally, I don't really mind that there is like a long endgame grind in order to try to max out your gear and make it like, better, and like there's something to do, which I really appreciate. We are usually moaning about the lack of endgame, and there's not really any kind of content that people want to like really strive for. It has gotten a bit better now with the progression changes and with the Tone 4 difficulty ramp and so on. But then we still have mostly just the pits, and a lot of at least like competent builds can go to Tone 4 no problem, even with like not perfect masterworks, and like maybe 8 out of 12 items is pretty easy to achieve. And in some cases you don't really care about the masterwork hits, I'm fine with getting decks, I'm fine with getting the life, kind of whatever in some cases. But since there are these examples where there's such an extreme discrepancy between getting the perfect outcome and the almost perfect outcome, or they have cases like this where I literally have 3 useless stats on my helm, it does feel extremely bad to try to masterwork your gear, I gotta say. So what can be done about all of this? So my feedback for all of this would be that, well, it might be an idea to look at the cost of masterworking, or at least at the target farmability of certain mats of this, because especially by crystals and Forgotten Souls tend to be a huge bottleneck for people that are playing like kind of min-maxing in the trade economy. And even for me, with barely any trading, with barely any extra gold income, well, I am running very low here already, as you can see. I can barely do anything now. The legendary mats are usually fine because you just kind of pick out legendaries and salvage them. But I would also prefer if we just don't have to pick every single legendary all the time, to be honest. I wouldn't mind, people are asking for loot filters, for example. And if we have those, then we can't use them because we have to pick up every single item to then salvage that, right? So if we ever get a loot filter, then we need to also, do something about this basically. And a lot of the stuff just can't really be targeted. We have, for example, systems in the game where they could put, some kind of extra target farming like kind of content, right? If you're talking about whale crystals, like why can't we just do like legions? Way back in some earlier seasons, legions were actually relatively good to get these like basic materials like chunks and raw hide and so on. They were popping out like 900 at a time or so, which was kind of nice back then. But then this was nerfed for no reason whatsoever, I think. And now legions have no purpose. So why can't I get something like that back, for example? Why can't we do like, I don't know, Nightmare Dungeon side events? And that gives us tons of rare crystals. And, why can't we do, I don't know, Hell Tides and that gives us tons of Forgotten Souls or something that was actually a thing back in the day, but then that was changed. But I feel like overall there's not really a good way to really get any of this, besides just farming more bosses, right? People just do like non-stop Belial and other bosses, and this is actually the best source for most of these materials, which leads to a lot of the like fatigue of, you do boss rotas over and over and over and over. Blizzard has said that they don't want us to do that many bosses, but actually the opposite has happened, right? We have duped materials in the softcore economy. People are just farming like Belial non-stop because, they cost like nothing. And well, it's just kind of boring to do like the same boss 1,000 times, not only to get the uniques and the mythics, but then if you have those, you want to masterwork them, and the best source of the material for that are still the bosses. So I want to play other stuff. I want to pay my Duriel tax every season. I'm fine with that. Get my items, and then I want to be out of there and never touch the bosses again. But the best way to get most of these materials is to farm more bosses, and I think that's also a massive problem. But then the other thing that could be changed is also the masterworking system itself, and this goes back to what I said earlier, which is the full reset you have to do every single time. Like, why does it reset to 0 when you try to get an upgrade on your gear, right? I talked about, okay, you might just end up with worse than you had before, and that just feels bad. So I think a good solution could be to just remove 4 ranks of your masterwork. You know, the whole masterworking system is actually set up to always go like, you know, 4 ranks, 4 ranks, 4 ranks, because you get the first crit, the second crit, the third crit. And I think it would be kind of nice if we have a more straightforward path forward with our gear, where we can go to 4, we try to get the right thing. If we don't get it, we reset. And then eventually, after like a few attempts, you get what you want. And then you go from 4 to 8, and then you reset and it goes back to 4. Maybe there could be an optional button to fully reset. You know, I guess that could be something. But I think the reset masterwork, if that was just 4 layers at a time, that would be ideal, because then you go from crit to crit to crit and you slowly upgrade your item to exactly what you want. And you would prevent outcomes like this, and you would also allow people a way forward with items like this that require exactly the right stuff in exactly the right places. Now, of course, such a system would make it ridiculously much easier to get the stuff that you want. So I think there needs to be some kind of like increase in the cost as well. If we do like only a reset of 4 ranks at a time instead of all ranks at a time. So I guess the cost would have to go up or something to kind of compensate a little bit, because otherwise everyone is going to run around with like the perfect masterworks very soon, basically. But on the other hand, I mean, especially the last ranks, hitting those is pretty tough no matter what. In any case, this is my summary here, and if all of this didn't demotivate you yet to try to masterwork your gear to perfection, well, then just know that every time you find a new item, you have to do the same process again on that slot. So that's gonna be great. And well, even with this system that I just described, for example, where you can do 4, 4, 4 and then reset only 4, for example, you would have exactly the same problem, right? You find an upgrade and you don't want to touch it because you're already like, you know, 5 hours of grinding deep on that one piece just to try to masterwork it, and then you get a better roll, and you just, you know, you can't transfer the outcome of your masterworks to the other item. Yeah, you can salvage your old item, but you only get back the materials that are currently on the masterwork. So if in case you didn't know, if you salvage a masterworked item, I think you get 60% of the materials back that you invested, but it doesn't count all of the previous resets. So if you reset an item 100 times, you don't get back like 30,000 opticide or something. You get like, you know, 3,000 or something from a 12 out of 12 item. So it's only like the current ranks that are counted. So I think at the very least, the system would have to maybe remember all of the invested materials forever or something, so that we can actually salvage our old gear and then use that to transfer, you know, basically the results over to a new item. Or there could be some other system involved, I guess, where maybe we can take out the masterworks of one item and then transfer to a new item or something like that, if it's like a copy of the same stats. I don't know. There could be maybe some stuff like that, but this is something far out, I guess. For now, I think Masterwork definitely needs an update, especially when it comes to the resetting part, and well, Material Grind also needs an update. I really don't want bosses to be the best grind for materials. I think it's just kind of boring. It burns people out like nothing else. And there is so much other content in the game that could have a purpose that just doesn't. So why not do something there? So that's my feedback here for now. Let me know what your thoughts are about the system. Let me know what you think about what you have done with your masterworks, and maybe what's your usual strategy, for example. But I thought this was worth sharing here. So again, a shout out to Beatdropper, who made the simulations, and Icy Troll, both from Maxroll, who put this together. So this was a very interesting experience, I gotta say. So I already knew roughly the values, but seeing it like this really puts it into perspective. So that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your feedback, and let's see what happens. See you guys next time.